Hey everyone, in this video I want to talk about deployment stacks, a new capability related to the management of the life cycle of a set of resources that form a certain application or solution, but also be able to protect them from certain types of actions, even from security principles with high role-based access control permissions. Think of deny. Now, if we take a step back, everything in Azure is defined within a resource provider, and then within there we get our resources. Now, a resource lives in one and only one resource group. So it could be resource group 1. Other resources may live in resource group 2. And these resource groups, remember, live inside a subscription. And then all of our subscriptions can be part of a management group hierarchy. So I could think, well, this subscription rolls up to some management group, and obviously there could be other subscriptions within there. Then that management group could be part of another management group, could be other ones over here, which ultimately, at the end, will roll up to some root management group. And that root management group actually lives underneath our Azure AD or our Microsoft Entra ID tenant. So all of these subscriptions under here trust the same. So all of this, we have this management group hierarchy. Now, one of the reasons we have all of this is because there's certain things we like to apply. I can think, well, I might want to deploy things like Azure Policy, which is very useful for governance, controlling maybe types of objects, where I can create things, requirements that have to exist. I can apply role-based access control, very granularly say, well, these security principles can perform these actions on these types of resource. There are lock capabilities. There are budget capabilities. And for all of these things, I can apply them at different levels. Hey, I might apply them down at a resource group. I might apply them at a subscription. I can apply them at management group levels. And they get inherited down. So all of these things are great from a governance, control, tracking capability of all of our resources. So fantastic. So we're talking about all of these resources. So what's the best way to actually define all of these resources? So in an ideal world, the way we want to define the resources we actually want to create is we want to use infrastructure as code. Now what that means is we're going to have some kind of template file that will define everything we want. So I'm going to think about, well, okay, I have my template. Now, even within Azure, there are different options. We have the traditional ARM JSON template. We have the newer Bicep capability. And then there were third-party ones as well. But the whole point of these is we define as code the resources we want. And that gives us a number of benefits. If we think about we're defining as code what we want, well, it's prescriptive. There's not going to be variation in what ends up happening compared to, hey, the portal where we're clicking, or even an imperative command where I'm typing out exactly what I want it to do. Maybe I change something. So I always get the same thing, and this helps avoid human error. It's also declarative. And what this means is I'm not telling it how to do something. I'm not telling it create this or modify this. I'm just stating my desired end state, and it's the job of the engine to work out, well, does that exist today? If it doesn't, okay, I need to go and create it. If it does exist, does it match the configuration? Well, if it doesn't, hey, I need to go and make it match this. I'm just saying, hey, make this so. Because these are files one of the great things we can do here, and what we'll nearly always do, is if we think about something like Git, which is version control. So this is the great capability here. I'm going to add in version control. These files, when I create them, I will go and commit them to a version control system. So now I can easily track them. And with that, I'm also going to get great reuse. I can define modules of certain configuration to use them. I can run things like validation before I even try to provision the resources. I may have what if capabilities. There's a huge span of things I can achieve. But also with this integration with Git and version control systems, the other thing we're commonly going to do is after I do those commits, well, as part of the DevOps, I can have these pipelines that can actually then go and do a deploy. And hey, it goes and ends up in my cloud, for example, Azure. So it's very prescriptive. I have these capabilities. And once again, through all of these things, once I define these, I'm going to end up with a file that commonly defines our complete application. So maybe it's got a VNet in there, the subnets, it's got, hey, you need this virtual machine scale set, you need this load balancer, I need these extensions. I define everything I need within here. So this single file will comprise of everything we want. And that's great if we then think of taking this and we deploy it to a single resource group. So ideally, hey, we take this template and we do a deploy. Now, the point of a resource group is I group things in a resource group that share a common lifecycle. They provision together, they run together, ultimately they get deprovisioned together. And if I follow this pattern, it's actually pretty good. When I'm finished with this, maybe it's a dev test, maybe it's production, but I use blue-green and I create the new set. Once I've warmed it up, I move production to it, and then I just want to delete the old one. Great, I can just delete the resource group. But that's not always the case. What also very commonly will end up happening is, in addition to this like great scenario, well, we might also have a scenario where, well, it maybe deploys to multiple resource groups. Maybe what I actually target is a subscription level, which then ends up deploying into multiple resource groups. Now it's harder to track. Maybe it even deploys to some management group, so my deployments actually now span multiple subscriptions. So it gets harder and harder to track all of the different resources. It gets harder and harder to clean up those resources if I'm done with that environment. Now I could use things like tagging, and I could have that metadata to try and help me identify it. They can get really, really tricky. And so with a normal deployment in Azure, once I've done the deployment, that deployment object doesn't do anything anymore. It doesn't help me track the resources. And so I can get into problems trying to understand, well, which resources are part of which solution or application. So with this, as is, we have some challenges. So if we think about the pain points we have, challenge one is, well, how do we handle long-term that life cycle, and particularly the cleanup? If it's scattered over resource group, it's scattered over subscriptions maybe, how do I easily clean those things up when I'm done with it? But also one of the big problems I have is we have role-based access control, which is fantastic, but maybe I'm stamping down a certain set of configuration for a subscription, for a resource group, maybe multiple subscriptions, and I want to limit what people can do. But if I'm a resource group owner, if I'm a subscription owner, I can change everything. So one of the challenges we face is this idea of a lack of deny assignments. Now, there have been solutions around this. If you've been with Azure for any amount of time, you've probably seen blueprints. So if we jump over really, really quickly, yes, we had the idea of blueprints. And a blueprint had this capability of, yes, I can define a blueprint, and a blueprint can consist of policy assignments and resource group creation and deploying templates. And one of the things I could do when I assign it is we had these locking capabilities. So do not delete, i.e. I could modify it, but not delete it, or actually make it read-only. So I can't change anything to it. But there were a lot of challenges with the way blueprints worked. And in reality, everything a blueprint could do except for that lock, I could do with regular templates. And I even created a video about that. Now, there is a deny action capability today, but it's only for deletes. It's very limited. But basically, blueprints are in deprecation. Now, we've still got, at the time of recording, 3 years, but they are definitely going away. So if we think about that, we want a better way on how I can manage sets of resources, maybe have a better way to define those deny assignments, a better way to clean up the resources after the fact. And as you would fully expect about a video called deployment stacks, well, my solution is going to be something called a deployment stack. So now we have this new concept of the deployment stack. And the great thing about this, it is not some huge, new, painful thing that we have to learn. It's not like, oh, I'm going to have to learn some brand new set of objects I have to create, these brand new format definition for templates. None of that applies. So the whole point of a deployment stack is it's a collection of resources. So it's just a collection of, and this is the key point, managed resources. Now that word manage, what we're really talking about here is a better management of the life cycle of the resources we are utilizing. So if we think again about this idea of the template that defined them all, the problem before was once we deployed it, there's no real correlation between those resources anymore. I couldn't, for example, in the future go and delete that deployment. If I delete the deployment object, it doesn't do anything. The resources are all left behind. So what this collection of managed resources means is now I can define lifecycle operations on the stack that will get created. So I could in the future delete the stack, for example, and it would delete all of the resources if they were spanned over resource groups or subscriptions. It wouldn't matter. If I remove a resource from my definition, well, then I have choices. Do I want to delete it, or do I want to now just make it unmanaged so it's not part of the stack anymore? So I can add and remove things from the stack, but the key point is a particular stack should share a common lifecycle. So I'm only going to put things in the same deployment stack that I want to share a common lifecycle. But here is the great thing. My deployment stack, if we think about the template, it is exactly the same. I do not change my template at all. It is my unaltered JSON file or bicep file that deployed, hey, those collection of resources I use for a certain solution. All that's actually going to change is that initial imperative command I use to deploy that template. So what we were used to before, we're drawing in a different color. So before what I would use would be let's say the AZ CLI, but obviously I can use PowerShell and other methods. But before it would be an AZ deploy. And I could deploy it to group, as in a resource group, a subscription, whatever. So there's a whole bunch of parameters. I would set a name for it, et cetera, et cetera. Well, now what this changes to is instead of the word deploy, it's going to change to the word stack. And then I have all the parameters. I don't change the file at all. Exactly the same file. I'm literally swapping out the word deploy for the word stack. And then obviously there's PowerShell, there's a new AZ subscription deploy stack, etc., etc. Now, there are some, obviously we get new parameters, and there are some differences. One of the important differences, as with AZ deploy, we had a name. It gets way more important with a stack. Because remember now, the stack is this thing we're managing, and everything within it will get tracked for the lifecycle. So whereas before the name was ephemeral, yes, there was a name for the deployment, who cares? Well, now in the AZ stack world, that name, whatever we give it, so we give it some value, this is now very, very important. It's not just this ephemeral thing that we don't care about. We're going to be using that for the lifetime of all of these resources. So again, this is an example file. And the key point here is in the old days, I would use AZ deployment. And yes, there was this name, but it was just a name of deployment we did not care about. All that changes is we swap the word deployment for the word stack. But now this name is way more important. This demo group stack is something we can perform operations on in the future. For example, I could just delete the stack and I would have choices on what I want to happen to all of the resources that are part of the stack. So we're going to kind of track through that. Another big thing we can do is we do now have this idea of deny settings. So yes, we have this idea of the name, but then also I have a whole set of deny settings. Now, I do want to point out, these are control plane only. Now, if we think about Azure, remember there's two planes. There's the control plane, which are the ARM commands I run to create a resource, update a resource, delete a resource. Then there's data plane. If it was a storage account, create a blob, write to a blob, delete a blob. If it was a database, perform this operation against a table. These denies affect control plane, but it doesn't affect the data plane. So I could completely lock the control plane so I couldn't modify it, the control plane, or delete it, but I could still go and add and remove blobs and records and everything else on the data plane. So these are all control plane operations only. So now I have a deny settings mode. And this is completely optional if I want to have deny settings. So again, I'm using the CLI, but we have a deny settings mode. And I could say I want to deny write and delete. So if I deny write and delete, well, that's read only. So I want to be super restrictive. I'm laying something down that you can't modify, you can't delete. So I want this to be read only. I can say deny delete. So you can modify it, but you can't delete it. Or I could say none. So this is absolutely an option. I don't want to do any deny. I want to take advantage of this capability, maybe for that lifecycle management, maybe to be able to clean it up in the future. I don't need to deny anything as part of this. But I do have to give one of these. But again, I could just say none. Now here's where it gets really nice though. Optionally, so again, completely optional, I can also, as part of these deny settings, add in, and these get kind of long, but I have this deny settings excluded principles. And then I can just put the GUIDs of, so GUID 1, GUID 2. i.e., I'm denying these actions, but these security principles can still perform them. Maybe it's a managed identity, maybe it's part of some pipeline. But I can exclude certain principles from these denies that I'm going to put. And I can have up to 5 of these. I can also have excluded actions. And again, then it would be the action name. Can have multiple if I want to. I can actually have up to 200 of those. So now I could say, hey, you can't write or delete to it, but hey, maybe I allow you this one action, maybe it's related to tagging or something. So I can get very granular in what I want to do with that. And then there's also deny settings apply to child scopes. So imagine I deployed it to a virtual machine, for example, and a virtual machine can have extensions. So in this case, hey, if I added this parameter, those deny settings would also impact any extensions that I might add in the future on that resource. And we're going to see these. I'm going to show these later on when I do the demo, so this will all kind of make a lot more sense when you see these in actions. But again, completely optional. I can add these deny settings, but if I do have them, I can then exclude certain security principles. I could exclude certain actions, and it is an or. So if I define principles and I defined actions, it's not like I have to be that security principle and then I get that action. No, if I'm the security principle, I'm excluded from that deny. If I'm not those security principles, well then I'll get those actions allowed for me. So it's an or relationship. Okay, fantastic. One of the next things we get is this idea of a fast cleanup. So I talked about this idea of, hey, cleaning up, I could delete the stack. So one of the other really nice benefits we get over here is, yes, the deployment stack is this collection of managed resources. Great. But what this enables me to do is this very, very fast cleanup. Imagine I had a huge deployment of a very large amount of resources. Ordinarily, if we were to delete that, it would be an ARM call for every resource we make. So that delete would be really, really slow. Take a long time to go through and delete each resource. What I get with these deployment stacks is if I do like a delete of the stack, it makes one call to the ARM bulk, oh, spelled that wrong, bulk delete API. So really, really quickly, it's just going to clean everything up. Now, I guess it's actually a good time to mention something while I'm talking about the features of a deployment stack. So if you ever remember Gremlins, there were these golden rules. So you don't feed it after midnight and don't get them wet, whatever. So with a deployment stack, the resources you create must be created in the same or a child of the target. So if we think about, okay, so the resources created must be same or child target. So all I mean by this is we can draw these out super, super quickly. So imagine I had two resource groups. So I had maybe a resource group 1 and a resource group 2, and I was doing a resource group level deployment of a stack. So if I was to deploy my stack to resource group 2, all of the resources would also have to be in resource group 2. So if this is where the stack is created, all of the resources have to be in the same resource group. I could not, from the same stack, put resources in resource group 1. That would not be allowed. It has to be in the same or a child. And so where the child idea would work is, well, imagine now I've got my subscription, and in that subscription, I've got my same resource group 1 and resource group 2. Well, now if my target deployment was at a subscription level, so now here is where I create the stack, then absolutely both resource groups are a child. So I could have resources over here, and I could have resources over here. And you get the idea. If I was to deploy it to a management group where the stack was created, then obviously the resources could live in different subscriptions, in different resource groups. That's all good. So the resources, and that follows ARM. It just has to live within the same or a child scope of where I'm trying to deploy to. So just that's very, very important to realize. And we think about that a lot when I'm going to consider, well, okay, where are my resources being distributed over? What should be the scope of the stack? Because, this is the key point, just like a regular deployment, where I can deploy to a group as the target, a subscription as the target, a management group. Remember, we're not changing anything about the template. We're not changing its capabilities. So a stack can span multiple subscriptions, multiple management groups, multiple resource groups. It's exactly the same. And that's where the stack will live wherever I target. So the stack could live in a management group, a subscription, or a resource group. So that's just one of those kind of golden rules. Because again, remember, my stack should only consist of resources that have a certain commonality. We want them to share the life cycle. If you've got a bunch of resources that don't have that, they should be separate stacks. I want to use this in the right way. Now, I mentioned that I can add and remove resources, and I can even delete the entire stack. So that opens up this idea then, well, what happens on unmanage? Because absolutely now, resources can fall out of the management of the stack. If I was to just remove it from the template and redeploy it, what happens to that resource? So now the next thing I have a concept of is this idea of action on unmanage. And once again, that could be one of two things. I could remove that particular resource from the template and then rerun the stack command, or I just delete the stack. Now, the default behavior, if I don't specify anything, and so there isn't a switch for this, is detach. This is the default. So if I had a template and I removed a resource, then I rerun the AZ stack group command, whatever it is, the resource that is no longer defined in that template would now just become an unmanaged resource, i.e. it's just a regular ARM resource, it doesn't get deleted, it just falls out of the scope of the stack. So that will be the default. So that's the safest thing. You're not accidentally going to delete a bunch of things because you took it out the template. But I can change that behavior. So there's the default, but what I can also do is I can say dash dash delete resources. And that should be pretty obvious what that's going to do. It's going to delete them. So if I delete a storage account or a VNet or a database from the template file and then rerun the command, once it falls out of the scope of the stack, it will just delete it. I can also specify delete resource groups. Now, if I specify this, I also have to specify that. I have to delete the resources, but that would clean up resource groups maybe it created as well. Then there is also a delete all. Imagine I was creating management groups, for example, because I can do that. I might create management groups. So here I'm saying, hey, I want to delete resource groups, resources. And if I created other stuff that isn't a resource group or resource, create those as well, delete those as well. So I can control that behavior if things become unmanaged because, hey, I remove it from the template or I actually go and delete the whole stack. And it will tell me every single time I run this. Again, if I don't specify one of these, it's going to detach. And then if things get detached or deleted, it will show me, hey, these were removed from the stack, or this was now deleted from ARM because of the action I just took. So it always gets returned as part of the put command when I interact with the stack. So this is super important. So I think now probably the best thing to do, we've talked about all of the theory around it, is to kind of see it in action. And what I want to do to try and help track all of this is let's really follow an example. So let's go through an idea of seeing all of these things. And so we'll start off obviously with an initial deploy, which is going to define some resources. And what we'll track is what is the state of the stack. So let's use another color. So this is what's in the stack. And then also we can track what becomes, I'm going to run out of colors obviously here, what becomes unmanaged. And I suppose we should also track while we're doing this if things actually become gone. So I have a little headstone. They get deleted. So let's run through these scenarios to help track what actually exists in the environment. So let me first show you, we're going to use a few different basic files so I can show you these at the different levels. So if we jump over, we're going to start off. Now remember in Bicep, just super quick. So again, we're using the stack command instead of the deployment command. We're going to deploy the stack at a resource group level. Remember, the name in Bicep is the name of this resource within the realm of this Bicep file. It lets me go and reference this particular resource in the Bicep file in other places. But this isn't going to get written into ARM as an ARM name. But we're deploying it to a certain resource group. Oops. We're deploying it to a certain resource group. And this is the file we're actually deploying. And notice I'm saying none to the deny settings. I'm not using deny settings. And all this Bicep file does is it's using the current location. It makes up a storage account name based on a unique string of the resource group. It's creating a VNet name, and then it's creating two storage accounts. So it's going to create one that ends in demo 1, one that ends in demo 2, and then it's going to go and create a virtual network. So it's going to create 3 resources, and that's it. So if we take the first line, and actually what we could see super quick is if I go and look at that target resource group, is currently empty. And also we can see there are no deployment stacks that exist. So now we'll go and jump back and let's run this command. Now remember, I also didn't specify an action on unmanaged because at this time I know, well, I'm not actually removing anything or changing anything, and that default would have been detached anyway, which I would be fine with. So I've not specified any of those settings. So this is now going to go and create the stack and then create the resources, and all those resources will be managed by that particular stack. So we can go and see all of this happen. So that completed, and if we scroll up to the top, so notice it has the action on unmanage, and they were all set to detach because I didn't specify anything, and we'll always see those. We can also see we had the deny settings. It wasn't applying it to child scopes. I didn't exclude any actions or principles, and my mode was none. So we can see all of those applied as well. We can see durations, errors, blah, blah, blah. But what we can see is the resources then got created and the status is then now managed. So we can see all of these now managed. If I jump over to the portal and refresh, well, there are my resources. All good. And also at this level now is the deployment stack, which I can absolutely look at in the portal as well. So in the portal, I can see it. I can see down here, we have the deny settings. So I can go and look at the deny settings, which I don't have any of. But also in this overview, notice I have the option to delete it, but I can also edit and redeploy. So those settings that I talked about, if I was to do an edit, notice I could change the behavior from detach to delete, and I could actually implement some deny settings. So I can modify this from the portal as well. But I don't want to do that for now. But as we can see, it went and created those things. So if I think about what have I done right now, well, in my stack now, it created the stack, so this sprung into life, and it created those two storage accounts. And it created a virtual network. That's what that is supposed to be. So fantastic. Now what I want to do is I'm going to run the deploy again, but this time in the template file, I'm going to remove from the definition storage account 1. So I'm going to remove that. And when I run the command, I'm not going to specify any on unmanaged configuration settings, which means remember that default should be to detach it. So that's what should happen. It shouldn't delete it. So if we jump back over again to our code, and we'll go to the template, and we'll just take our storage account 1, and all I'm going to do is comment it out. That's all I'm doing. I'm going to comment it out, save the file, and rerun basically exactly the same command again. Now notice it's saying, well, you know what? You're creating a resource stack that already exists. This is going to get applied to resources, and hey, I'm going to detach them. Are you sure you want to do this? Yes. Go ahead. So it's given me that warning. Now I can not have to say yes to that warning. You can see above in a future command, so I got lazy. You can just do -- yes. But, so now it's going to run. And once again, what it's doing is it's looking at the template and it's making that the reality. But because I've now removed a resource, it's deciding, well, what should I be doing for that resource that no longer exists? And what we'll see, so obviously here's our deployment stack. Now notice, so it's already done it, it's just the command's still running. It's tracking it though. It's tracked. This is now detached from this deployment stack. So it didn't delete it. That resource is still there, totally fine, but it's now detached. So if we now think about what's happened to our deployment stack, so our deployment stack has still got storage account 2, and it's still got our virtual network, but now the storage account 1 is unmanaged. It still exists, it's not been modified in any way, it has just fallen out of scope of our stack. So it's no longer managed as part of our stack. Now what would happen if we added an existing resource back in? Remember, it still exists. So what if I just remove the comment lines? So we're just going to add it back in and run the command again. So if we jump back over again, hopefully the command has finished. So it has finished as part of this. So now there's just 2 resources that are managed, which is what we would expect. We can see all the same information on everything that happened. And it's now showing as well in the response detached resources. And it's saying, hey, this one, that storage account, that was detached, which is the same thing we saw. So what I'm now going to do is remove the comment and run the command again. But just to make this a little bit of fun, so I can show you a couple of different things, we're just going to add that yes command back in, so I don't have to say yes to it. So now what it's going to do is look at, well, what exists and make it the reality. So the key point here is, and this is really interesting, imagine in the past, I've already done a whole bunch of deployments of my templates using AZ deploy. And now I'm like, well, this stack thing seems great. I would love to start using this. How do I move to start using stacks? I rerun the template with stack command instead. I don't have to do anything else. If I already have templates that I've used to deploy my resources in the past and the resources just exist, I can just rerun the template again like I normally could because it's declarative. It's saying make it so. If it's already so, it doesn't change anything. But now I'm saying I can run the same thing I ran maybe 6 months ago. Now, make sure no one has messed with it outside the template and modified it in the portal. So now reality doesn't match, which will be terrible, but just be confident of that. I can just rerun the template again using the AZ stack command. And it will just bring all of those resources now within my stack. So I could take an entire file that I've run before and just bring it back in. So if we go and look, let's see if that command, we can go to the portal again. So if I hit refresh, so it's back in. It's back within the scope of the resources. So as we can see very clearly, if I added it back in, even if it's an existing resource, well now 1 is back as part of my stack. And I've got my virtual network. So this was brought into my stack. Okay, now let's see a more negative example. Let's delete this again. Poor storage account number 1. But this time, I'm going to say delete all. Now, delete all means it could delete resource groups, resources, management groups, etc., etc. I'm just typing that because it's the shortest command I can type. I could obviously just do delete-resources. It will have the same effect here because I'm only removing a resource. So what does this do as part of our command? So if we jump back over, let's see if that finished running, which obviously it should have done. So yeah, so I can see the same stuff. I've now got 3 managed resources within there. It's got all my same details as before. So I get all of the detail. So now what I'm going to do is let's comment out that resource again. Save it. But this time I'm going to add in delete all. I'm not going to do dash dash yes. But it's telling me, notice the words are different. I'm now going to delete resources and resource groups. Before it said detach. So yes. And obviously you can guess what's going to happen. We can go and look at the portal, see how quickly this refreshes. So notice it's gone. It does not exist anymore. If we go and look at the resource group, so it's still there right now because the delete will go through it. It's now gone from the stack. And what will happen within, this portal takes 30 seconds, a minute, but that's going to get removed from there as well. So while that's happening, so now if I do the delete and I've removed that resource from the definition, so we saw storage account 2 was still there. The VNet was still there. But now storage account 1 is no more. Now, obviously, if I uncomment that line now, it would create it again for me. But it's a new resource. It would have the same name, but if this had blobs in it, or if it was a database, had records in it, they've all gone. If I added it back now, the declarative nature will say, oh, it's missing, I need to create it, but there's no resource to bring back. It will completely recreate it now. So let's go back and see how our portal's looking. So this is the resource group. So now it's gone. Poor demo storage account 1 has gone. And now it's actually showing us, hey, look, we deleted this particular resource. So now if we go back again and look at the return of our put, all our resources, deny settings. Now we have a deleted resources returned that tells us the resource we deleted this time. So we can see all of that information happening. And then obviously the final thing, oh, actually, before I do that, let's just talk about deny settings. So what I'm going to do now is I'm not going to uncomment that line or anything like that. But I'm going to add a deny settings of deny delete. But what I'll do is I'll exclude a certain principal. So that's the GUID of me, John. So I'm just going to rerun it again. So now it's going to deny delete. Now the whole point here is while this is running, I'm now going to show you a logon. So I'm now Clark Kent. We can see Clark up here. And Clark, if I look at this resource group, and I can see all the resources, if I look at my access control, on this resource group, I'm an owner. I can do anything as part of this resource group. Super powerful. If I go and look at a resource, obviously those get inherited. However, there's a deny assignment created by a deployment stack. So it's given me all of the information. And if I jump back super quickly and now look at that deployment stack, and we look at the deny settings, it shows me, hey, look, we've denied delete, and there's me as an excluded principal. So let's try Clark. Clark, remember, is an owner of this resource. Let's delete it. Delete it. Yep, go. Failed. And it gives you huge detail. This was denied because of the deny assignment with the name deny assignment created by a deployment stack. The scope. So I get full information of why, but now even though I'm an owner of the resource, I cannot delete it. What about me? So I'm excluded from that particular deny. So if I go and look at the resource, and let's look at my access control, I don't have a deny assignment because I was excluded. So I absolutely can take that and I can delete it. So that will run through, but it successfully deleted that storage account. So that's where you can see some of those deny things coming into play. And then while I'm here, I guess I'll finish off the entire thing. So if we was to look, the ultimate last action I'd probably ever do, and actually you would see in that deny, so there's note it says these deny deletes got added as part of the status. And then the original command, remember, we have the deny settings added in. And it talks about the excluded principles. All of this is always returned to confirm to me. But then finally, hey, I'm done with this test. I'm done with this project. I want to delete the stack. Now notice as part of the delete, I'm not specifying the bicep file anywhere. I'm saying delete the stack. And I want to just delete the resources defined in it because the resources are tracked as part of the stack. So I'm just going to say delete it. Go. You sure? Yes. Remember, I could have done detach. I could have omitted the delete resources and it would have just done a detach on it, but I didn't. So it's actually going to go and clean them all up. So what we'll see eventually is all of these will clean up. But what we'll see is the deployment stack itself is showing us deleting. So there's no resources anymore. It states it's deleting, and it's just going to go and disappear. And so the key point here is, let's just refresh what happens. So ultimately, so I'm done with all of these tests. I've done with my settings. I can say delete the stack. Now, when I delete the stack, what's really important here is I specify what to do. Again, the default would just be detach. So if I ran it without any parameters, what will end up is those two remaining resources, assuming I wasn't a hooligan and went and deleted the second storage account, well, I would have ended up with storage account 2 and the VNet would have just become unmanaged resources. Or I could have done delete resources or delete all, in which case now storage account 2 and the VNet would have got added to our SAD. They just get deleted, which is what we did. So the key point of this is it shows that life cycle. And if we go back and look really quickly, let's refresh. So it's still deleting. It can take a little while. I think the actual resources are probably gone. Let's have a quick look. So it's cleaned them up. The clean is actually super, super fast. I think just some of the metadata around the deployment stack takes a little bit of time, but you can see they've gone. So it has completely cleaned them all up. So all of this was about deploying, so you can see that's still running. All of that was about deploying to a resource group. Now, nothing fundamentally changes at different scopes, but I just want to show you another level. So what we're going to now deploy is at a subscription level instead. So I'm going to use a different template. And all the different template does, so it's this one, is going to create 2 resource groups. And then for each resource group, so notice it creates their parameters. So it's going to create the 2 resource groups here. For each resource group, it has that friendly bicep name to reference it. So demo RG1 and demo RG2. And then it's going to call another template for each of them. And the scope, the first time will be demo RG1, the second time will be demo RG2, and it's going to call the same template, and that template just creates 2 storage accounts. So what we should see happen is it creates 2 resource groups. In each resource group, it creates 2 storage accounts. So that's all this is going to do. But it's going to let me deploy it at the subscription level now. So, hey, create 2 resource groups. Within each, create 2 storage accounts. That's all this is going to do. So, let's clear this, make it a bit neater. So now what I'm going to have is, I'm going to do some denies again. I'm going to do multiple principals just for fun. And we'll say the yes. Notice before I actually run that, actually I'm jumping ahead. Let's just do the create. So now I'm targeting the subscription, and it's going to now go and create multiple resource groups. If we jump back over and we just go and look at our resource groups, what we should see get created, and they're not there yet. Let's refresh. There we go. They just got created. Stack demo RG1 and stack demo RG2, and in each of them, so it's still creating the resources, we should see 2 storage accounts. So it's going through, and we will see those get created. So now we see them in that resource group, and we see them in the other resource group. And the important thing now, remember, so if I look at the deployment stacks, there's no deployment stack at the resource group, because remember, we deployed the stack at the subscription level. So now we see it at the subscription, but we'll see all the same things. So now I can see in the stack, hey, there's multiple resource groups exist, and there's multiple resources within it. And we have, so that's still being set up, right? So I didn't deploy these, and there's no deny settings right now. So I actually want to stress something here for a second. So we could absolutely deploy, remember, oops, didn't mean to do that. We could absolutely deploy our stack at a resource group level. So the stack gets created in here, and all the resources get created in here, which is kind of that same picture here. Challenge with that, if I was a resource group owner, because my permission is a contributor above can modify a stack, if I create the stack in the resource group and the resources within it, if I'm a resource group owner, I could mess with the stack. And so what I'm commonly going to want to do is deploy the stack at a level above where people have the permissions. Remember, I didn't have to create the resource groups. I could have used existing resource groups. So people could be owners, but if I deploy the stack at a level above, I can't mess with the stack. I don't have the permissions because the stack now exists at the subscription level, but I only have owner or contributor at the resource group level. Likewise, if I was a subscription owner, well, I could deploy as the senior administrator. I could deploy the stack at the management group level where those sub-owners have no permissions and they couldn't mess with the stack. They couldn't try and override the deny settings, the things I put in place. So realize where I deploy the stack is really important because yes, the resources have to be children of the scope of that. But if I want to stop people messing with it, don't deploy the stack at a location where those people are owners or contributors. I'll deploy the stack at a level higher than where they have RBAC permissions, so they have no ability to mess with it. So in my case, I've deployed it at a subscription level. So if I had other people that were just resource group owners, they can't modify the stack because they have no permissions to it. So that idea of the level to which I apply it is really important, which is what I'm doing here. So I've now taken this upper level and I'm now deploying it at the subscription level. So that's just why I'm doing that. So now if we go back, so those resources are all there. And Hey, great, that's deployed. Now, I will point out, I'm just deploying a regular template. I could use template specs, which is like that vending machine idea of creating, but a lot of teams are still just using regular templates. So deployed, everything else will look the same. They're all managed, all of these resources. I have no deny settings. And once again, I could dump out those stacks. I could list them. I could show detail about a particular stack, all from the command line. But now this point, I'm going to run it again, no changes, but now I'm going to add a deny delete and just exclude a couple of security principles. And those security principles, I think I did me and Batman, I think. Yes. So now I've excluded myself and Bruce Wayne. Oh, I didn't mean to give away it was Batman. But that's a deny delete. So what this would allow, once again, those things that have been created, even if I was a resource group owner, I can't do anything unless I am John Saville or Bruce Wayne. So once again, poor old Clark Kent, who has permissions because he gets inherited from the subscription level. So if I'm Clark over here, and I go and look at the resource groups, and I look at those ones that just got created, and I look at my permission. Oh, it's not good. It's kind of weird. Should be able to view my access. That's odd. Let's try and look at roles. Okay, well, I'm being rejected everything. Maybe that's part of it. But I would have permission on these resources. Let's see what this shows me. So I can actually see I've got a deny assignment, so I can't get the roles. It must be something to do with this deny assignment is messing it up. But I have a deny assignment. So even though I have permissions on this resource, believe it or not, because I've got inherited from subscription, I can't do anything to these resources. And if you're assuming I was just like a resource group owner, I can't change the stack either, because if I just have permissions at the resource group level, well, the stack isn't here. The stack has been created at the level above, so I still can't do anything within this. Now, so Clark couldn't delete those storage accounts. What if I now add in an excluded action, and I add in the ability to delete the storage account? So once again, let's just prove right now that Clark, if I go to the storage account and do delete, can't, because of the deny assignment. So same problem as before. So what we'll now do is let's run it again, but we're going to add an excluded action of delete. Now, this is a stupid example. I would never really add a deny assignment to delete and then exclude the action delete. Absolute garbage. However, I'm trying to prove the point of how the excluded actions override the overall deny assignment. So now we'll run it again. I didn't do the dash dash yes, but I'm not removing anything in the template. It won't do anything. So that's going to change that deny assignment. So now if we go back and look again, and let's look at our deny settings. Now we can see excluded action is storage accounts delete as well. Remember, this is an or. I can be one of these principles to be excluded from the deny assignment, or I can be any security identity, but I'm now allowed to perform that particular action. So now if I jump over, let's try and delete it again. It worked. Because now I have that particular action allowed for me. So this is really, really powerful. This ability to, yes, I can have denies. And again, I wouldn't exclude delete action on the storage account, but I could maybe, if I was locking it for write and delete, but maybe I would allow certain actions to manipulate metadata of some kind. I can be very, very specific about what I want to do. Again, it's only control plane, but I get all of those abilities. And then finally, it's going to work exactly the same way again. Oh, that's actually, I need to let that finish running. But I could then delete the stack. So in exactly the same way, hey, I could do dash dash delete all, and I'd have to say yes. But what we'll actually do this time, just to show you this example, we'll actually go ahead and delete it in the portal. So here, remember again, I had the same, I could edit, redeploy, I could change things around the deny settings and everything else. But what I'm going to do, just refresh this. If I do delete stack, it gives me the exact same options. Oops. Delete resources, resource groups. So I want to delete both resources and the resource groups. Makes me type in the name. And it's doing the same operation that it would have just done from the command line. There's nothing different here. I'm doing it through the portal instead. So that's going to go, and just like before, it will clean all these up. So the resources will all get deleted, including the resource groups, because I did basically delete all, and it will delete the deployment stack as well. And then the final demo, again, really nothing different, is I can target the management group. So remember, we have a management group hierarchy. If you've not seen management groups, just super, super quick. The whole point is I can create a hierarchy into which I can put my subscriptions. So then they inherit policy and RBAC, capabilities that I apply to those. But in exactly the same way, I can deploy a deployment stack to that location. So if I look right now, hey, there are no deployment stacks on the management group. And now what I've got is a to management group target. And really, I'm just lazy here. I have a certain subscription that I pass in, and then I just deploy the exact same target in a subscription to deploy the two resource groups and the two storage accounts to each. But it's just my target scope now becomes a management group. So if I now go through, let me just check. I want to see that portal stack and the subscription finished. I don't want to risk overriding the same resource that I'm deleting on one and creating in another one. You wouldn't normally do these in such quick succession. Well, I'm pretty sure the resources have gone, so I'm not going to wait longer. So now we'll run this. So I'm going to deny the write and delete again. Let's go and create this. So what we'll now see is at the management group level, so it won't be creating anything at the subscription level, but at the management group level, this one, we should now see a deployment stack. So it's deploying, so we can see it deploying. And then obviously from there, I could deploy to multiple subscriptions if that is the way my set of resources required, and they're still going to get tracked by the same management group. So in this template, although I could absolutely be deploying to multiple subscriptions. It would all get tracked over it. It's still within that life cycle. If I wanted to change resources, add and remove to it, ultimately delete it, I can do all of that even across anything that is a child of that stack. So now we can see, yep, it created all the same resources again. I just did it within one sub, but it could have spanned multiple subscriptions. All of the same capabilities are there if we wanted it to. So we can have those deny settings. What did I specify? So I denied write and delete. I think it's still deploying right now, which is why we don't see it in the portal yet. Oh, it is there. I didn't do any excluded. So we can see deny, write, and delete. And that's now there. And it would have, again, exactly the same. So now, even if I was a subscription owner, this stack doesn't show up. This stack is now at the management group level, But if I was to go and look at the subscription within it, the one I keep messing with, it's only still got the old one that it's cleaning up still. It can't see the new one. So if I was a subscription owner, I cannot mess with that other stack. I will just be, no matter what my permissions are, I can be an owner of the sub. If I've locked those resources, there's absolutely nothing I can do around them. And then ultimately, exactly the same way as before, I could then look and see, hey, yeah, look, that stack exists in the management group. It's not there in the subscription. So the subscription stacks have actually now gone. The portal might just be not refreshed properly. I could get the detail. I can even export a stack. So I can ask it to create me a template of the stack and all of the resources within it. I even wouldn't be able to delete the storage accounts. So even though I'm like the absolute power owner of the subscription, so that has now gone. So even me, because I've got no deny assignments, if I go to one of these storage accounts, it failed. Failed to delete the storage account. I get the same error about, hey, look, the stack, because it's at this management group level, is the scope. And that was just telling me that the old stack got deleted from before. So even me, the owner of everything, I can't defeat that stack. So obviously that's a really cool capability that we can now do within our environments. And then ultimately, again, I can clean it up. So I can delete the management group level, and it would delete across all the subs, the resource groups of any of those things I have created. So that was the demo. I hope that was really useful to help understand. Again, the permissions required is I have to have a contributor role. So contributor or owner, I could create a more scaled down permission technically, but remember when I deploy the stack, so if I deploy the stack, it also has to be able to create all of the resources in the template that it has to create. So my role would actually probably need to be pretty powerful anyway to create those resources. But yes, there are specific actions to stacks, but remember, I still need the permissions to create, modify all the resources that as the target of the template. Now, obviously I am running this imperative command, which has these parameters. Oh, go away. That would be part of my pipeline command. So today I have an imperative command. I would have an AZ deploy. All that's happening is I'm changing that command in my pipeline to the stack. Those parameters would be part of the deployment pipeline. So if it was like GitHub Actions, it would be in the YAML file. So that would still be in my Git file. I'm still version controlling all of that. If I'm using blueprints, they're going to be migration guides. So there'll be migration guides on how to clean up and migrate off of blueprints onto this as a solution. So when you look at this, I really think, yes, the deny assignments are super powerful. I think those exceptions for the principles and the actions, that's really, really useful. But even if you don't want the deny assignments, I actually think this lifecycle and cleanup is phenomenally powerful. The fact that now people struggle trying to get everything in one resource group, and the resource group only contains this one app. You end up with, well, there's things in this resource group that also have things from this other thing. My app actually has things in other resource groups. Maybe it's a peering connection or a private endpoint. Like, you end up with things scattered over eventually. With this, it doesn't matter where the resources end up. I'm tracking it as one set of managed resources. I can clean it up super easy. I can do those very fast cleanups with that bulk API. And I think that's going to be really useful. One thing that's interesting to me, and I don't have a good answer today, is why wouldn't you always just use a stack? if you're following any kind of good principle within your template, you should only have the resources that are part of, excuse me, a certain solution. I shouldn't be bundling 3 different apps in one template. Create a different template for each of those solutions. So if you're following that methodology, there's really no reason to just not use a stack. It just gives me other capabilities. It gives me more benefits. I don't have to use the deny stuff if I don't need that at this time, but the lifecycle management, the tracking and the cleanup, I think is really, really useful. So that's it. I hope this was useful. Hopefully you see how easy it is to actually adopt. If I'm already using infrastructure as code, it's a super simple switch. I don't have to use deny, but these action on unmanaged give me a lot of nice capabilities to clean up. And I think it can really help out in a lot of scenarios. As always, thank you for watching. Until the next video, take care.